And Indivisible released a new Ice Out for Good district visit toolkit. It's full of information on planning a successful district visit to your member of Congress's office. Every member of Congress has one or more local offices, but constituents rarely visit them. The Tea Party understood this, and they knew that they could make their voices heard by visiting those offices in person, often unannounced. It seems simple, but it can have an enormous impact. The members of Congress's whole congressional staff will end up talking about the group that actually showed up and demanded answers about Trump's agenda. It also demonstrates to them that you, their constituents, care very much about the issue you've come to speak about and that you'll be watching what they do going forward. We excuse me, we usually focus our in-district actions on weeks when Congress is home for recess, but you have a right to visit your elected officials' offices and raise your concerns to staff at any time. They'll be in recess through the end of this week. Here are links to the toolkit, the congressional calendar, and links to register your event on Mobilize. And tonight, as I mentioned, we're going to talk about safeguarding the 2026 elections. As many of you know, Solidarity Warriors organized an important moment for election integrity in Colorado on February 6th with guest speakers Attorney General Phil Weiser, Secretary of State Jenna Griswold, and State Senator Julie Gonzalez. After which we delivered a letter to Governor Polis with some very important and pointed questions about what he and his staff are going to do to protect the elections. And we'll let you know just as soon as we hear back from them, if we do. But before we get into that tonight, I want to introduce John Bringenberg. Sorry if I got your last name wrong, John. Please correct me. But he's going to tell us about the People's Whistleblower campaign.
Okay, there we go. Yeah, thanks, Tiffany. And I am happy to share some information about something that should go live later possibly this weekend, which is uh, a group of us in Colorado, based in Centennial and Colorado Springs, have been working feverishly to launch a new type of grassroots signature campaign. And it's never been done before. And the curious thing is that it uses a seldom used tool from the bottom of our democracy tool bag. And we call it the People's Whistleblower Campaign. And I want to grab the screen and kind of show you what this looks like, and then I'll be able to kind of talk to that. So let me grab the screen. Uh, and yes, so again, this website should be live in a couple of days and allow people to uh, sign up or add their name to this whistleblower complaint. And if you can see here, the the simple the headline is that when the president engages corruption and when Congress fails to act, then we the people are the whistleblowers. And the we're using the construct of a whistleblower complaint as the as the basically the construct or the basis of how this particular thing works. So it's got a lot of things that make it different and more interesting than writing a letter to your congressperson or making 5 calls or doing something like that. So this is an opportunity where, well, let me say this. Normally, a whistleblower is an individual who witnesses wrongdoing and And then that might be inside of government, it might be in public markets, it might be in the private sector, like with companies like Boeing or Meta or Google. Uh, they don't need to be confidential, but for the most part, most whistleblower complaints are confidential and they're brought by one individual. The thing that is so different here with our situation is that the federal corruption we see is rampant, and it's happens every day, and it's in plain sight. It's in the public view. And so, therefore, using the construct of a formal whistleblower campaign with massive public grassroots signatures is actually a very appropriate response. And this has the potential bigness to be a broad national campaign. But it's going to start here in Colorado, and we have the way things work with individual and third act. Those are the two primary groups I'm working with. I'm also working with Common Cause. Is they need to see the system work both functionally and in all different ways before they can put it on their national site. So it'll be very important in Colorado for us to kind of like jump in and check this out and add your name so that we can demonstrate within just a matter of weeks that we're doing that the system is working and it seems to make sense for people. A few other points I'll make, and then I'm happy to take questions. The this Let's see, the one of the things that's very different about filing a whistleblower complaint, even though we're essentially using the construct of this, is that uh, we start with over 2 dozen citations of wrongdoing by the executive branch and President Trump, and uh, it's hard to do that in a single letter to your congressperson. The the other thing is this is not like a letter campaign. It's not one and done. So it's an ongoing, sustained pressure on Congress when we submit this formal complaint. And as new wrongdoing happens, or new crimes are committed, or new insane things happen, then we simply add to this and we resend it. We don't start over like you would have to do with a letter campaign. Uh, the other very cool thing is it's not jurisdictional. What I mean when I say that is that if you're writing a letter, the only people that are going to pay attention to your letter are the two senators and the one House representative that are matched to your zip code. But when you file a whistleblower complaint, that goes to all 535 members of Congress. It also goes to, honestly, anyone else we want to send it to, which would be key committees with oversight of the executive branch. So this goes to everyone in Congress. Now, it's very likely that most will ignore it, and they have the right to ignore it. But nonetheless, it puts a very big, like a hammerhead, if you will, out there in terms of saying these are over 2 dozen things that we, the people, recognize as corruption, crimes, or wrongdoing, and we want Congress to do something about it now. The other thing is that it's a great complement to things like the No Kings March. If I contend that anybody who shows up on the street to march, and believe me, this group is so active. The Solidarity Warriors is deserves an Olympic gold medal for getting people out, kind of out there and making noise. Anybody who does that, they are a whistleblower. And so we want to just get your name on a formal document that puts that in writing, along with, again, over 2 dozen citations, and get that to every single member of Congress. Um, the the other thing that this can accomplish is it becomes a kind of like a tool or a tool, I'll say, for uh, uh, 2026 candidates, particularly progressive candidates. So they would have this document and they would be able to cite any of the wrongdoing that they cared to cite. But more importantly, if we do get massive numbers of signatures on a nationwide basis, we will be able to tell somebody running for office in Mississippi or in Texas or Iowa how many people have signed this complaint in their voting district. And so those are the things we're working on and planning to roll out. So let me just stop there. I don't want to take too much more of Tiffany's meeting, but if there are any questions, I'd be happy to try to answer.
We did have one question in the chat, which is how can we contact you about this new group?
Um, I think maybe the best way is to use, actually, I'll show it on the screen here at the bottom. Um, this info at peopleswhistleblower.org. Info at it's plural, so peopleswhistleblower.org. That's a live email, and that will get to me, and I'll be able to share it with our team. And we our efforts were posted about a week ago on the national, I'm sorry, the ICANN Indivisible Colorado site, and I'll be doing my best to get that posted again next week and maybe for a couple of weeks running. So that would be another way to find us. I actually I want to get offline with Tiffany at some point because I would also like to be just to be able to post the opportunity to sign up for this campaign on more indivisible sites, and I honestly don't know how to do that. And I know Tiffany does, so but we can take that offline.
Right. Are we able to share the link to the site with the group tonight, even though they can't make a complaint yet? If
No,
not, I can
yeah,
put it in the next newsletter.
yeah, let's do it on the next newsletter because currently it's like still in editing. Basically,
Okay.
where we are is that we have to incorporate a platform that can capture names and then sort them by voting district, and allow us to do reports and things like that. So it's kind of like
Okay.
they call it an advocacy platform. It's a lot like Mobilize, but it's one we have to pay for, and we have just figured out how to do that. So it should go live in a couple of days. But right now,
Okay.
you hit a dead end.
All right. Well, let me know and I'll put it in the next newsletter after it's live.
I do have a few more questions that people have been putting in.
Okay.
Um, will the complaints be those likely to be illegal, or will unethical be included? Would it help focus on potentially illegal?
Yeah, there's actually both. So we have 4 sections in the complaint section, and we have them sorted into high crimes, crimes, and I can't remember what we titled it right now. Actually, I'll show it because we're looking at this. So let me just, you won't be able to read it. It's kind of like fine print, but uh, this is what, sorry, this is what the formal complaint looks like. And just go down there. So it's got like a lot of therefores and whereases and stuff like that. But the list of citations, we start with a section on high crimes, and you can see there's lots. And then we go to uh, let's see, crimes, misdemeanors, and then we have a whole section on pathological lack of character. So, uh, one of the cool things about, I should say this, I probably meant to say it and kind of skipped it, but one of the very cool things about the construct of a whistleblower complaint, even if it was one individual against the Boeing Corporation or against the IRS or whatever it was, is a whistleblower. It's not a legal process or a legal action. There's no judge that looks this over. Um, it's a and the person who brings a whistleblower complaint has no burden to prove what they're witnessing. But the what we're doing basically is we're just alerting, uh, in this case, Congress, the body, the body of government that should be doing something. We're alerting them that there's problems and they're not doing their job. And so it's what I call, it's like guilty until proven innocent. In other words, we will make these claims. We don't have to prove them. It's up to Congress to investigate them. Um, another way I like to say it is prove me wrong. That's kind of like the spirit of this. Prove me wrong. And we've heard that before. So that's something that is kind of built into the nature of the way a whistleblower campaign works. Uh, we don't have to prove something. We simply have to call out what we see that is wrongdoing. Morgan, any
Well,
other questions there?
yeah, we've got a few more. Will this dilute official internal whistleblower uh, complaints?
Complaints. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. I haven't thought of that a lot. I have vetted this whole concept with a guy named Tom Devine, who is a guru of normal whistleblower stuff inside the Beltway. And those cases are all legitimate cases that are generally, again, it's like one against many or one against somebody. And this should not, um, this should not deter from that. But having said that, the organizations or the legal firms that would normally represent a whistleblower um, would not be involved in this. This is more of a grassroots people signature thing, which I would hope to get, thousands, hundreds of thousands, possibly, a million or more signatures on. So it's very different. It uses the construct of a whistleblower complaint, but it's not in the classic sense.
Okay.
And we have to leave it there because we have a
Okay.
ton to cover
Yeah.
tonight, but we will email you the rest of the questions. And then you can get back to us on that.
Perfect. Okay, thanks. Thanks so much.
Yep. Yeah, thanks for coming, John. All right, let's talk about safeguarding the midterms, including constitutional authority, historical precedent, and what we can do. Let's begin with the structural question. Before we talk about threats, before we talk about rhetoric, before we talk about personalities, we need to understand the constitutional framework that governs federal elections. Because without the foundation, it's impossible to evaluate what is plausible, what is lawful, and what is merely political theater. Article 1, Section 4, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution, often called the States and Elections Clause, provides the times, places, and manner of holding elections for senators and representatives shall be prescribed in each state by the legislature thereof, but the Congress may at any time by law make or alter such regulations except as to the places of choosing senators. This clause does something subtle but powerful. It divides authority. First, it gives states primary responsibility for administering congressional elections. States decide how ballots are formatted, how polling places operate, how districts are drawn, votes are counted, mail ballots are processed, and how results are certified. States are, in practice, the administrators of democracy, but that authority is not unlimited. States cannot change the constitutional qualifications for voting. They cannot redefine the age requirement for members of Congress. They cannot change the residency requirement. And since the ratification of the 17th Amendment in 1913, they cannot change the fact that U.S. senators and are elected statewide by popular vote. In 1932, the Supreme Court clarified the scope of state authority under this clause in Smiley v. Home, which affirmed that state regulation of congressional elections must still comply with constitutional structure. Now consider the second half of the clause, the part that's often overlooked. Congress may at any time override state election regulations by passing federal law. The Supreme Court reaffirmed that authority in Foster v. Love in 1997, holding that when Congress exercises its Elections Clause authority, federal law preempts conflicting state procedures. This is why congressional elections occur on the same day nationwide. It's why House districts must be geographically contiguous. And this is why districts must contain approximately equal numbers of residents. None of those requirements is spelled out in detail in the constitutional text itself, but Congress imposed them pursuant to its Election Clause authority. The key takeaway is this. The Constitution explicitly gives the power to override state election law to Congress, not to the president. So when there are threats to nationalize elections through executive order, we should evaluate those claims through the lens of constitutional authority. If Congress passes legislation regulating elections, such as the SAVE Act, that action is constitutionally grounded, though it will need a supermajority in the Senate to pass. We need to continue to pressure our legislators to stop this legislation. By contrast, unilateral executive action, like executive orders attempting to seize control of election administration, would face significant constitutional barriers, but we should still be aware and have our guard up. And now let's address another concern that has circulated, the deployment of federal agents to polling places. Federal law prohibits voter intimidation. These statutes exist to ensure that voters can cast ballots free from coercion. However, enforcement depends largely on the Department of Justice. And most federal protections apply specifically to polling places and a defined physical perimeter around them. That raises an important question. Does intimidation require physical presence? Or can public threats of enforcement, amplified widely, function as intimidation in themselves? It's worth considering whether the rhetoric of enforcement, even without physical deployment, can deter participation.
Now, let's zoom out. Historically, corrupt or compromised elections in the United States tend to follow a pattern. They occur when elections are extremely close or perceived to be extremely close. The outcome is decided by a small, exclusive group rather than clear popular majorities, and institutional rules are ambiguous or contested. Since the 17th Amendment established direct election of U.S. senators in 1913, our research volunteers were not able to identify specific instances of corruption in congressional elections. But before 1913, senators were chosen by state legislators. Each state had its own rules, and that system did create opportunities for corruption, deadlock, and political bargaining, where people were appointed instead of elected. The most historical crisis in American elections have centered on the presidency, particularly disputes over certification and counting of the Electoral College votes. There's also another form of election compromise, attempts by political actors to choose their voters rather than persuade them. American history has many examples of this. Partisan gerrymandering, things like poll taxes, voter intimidation, requirements for specific forms of ID, asymmetric access to polling places, and accidental purging of eligible voters from voter rolls. All of these are ways that votes can be or elections can be manipulated.
So let's take a look at several elections where these dynamics surfaced. We'll start with the most recent. In 2020, Donald Trump employed what communication scholars refer to as the fire hose of falsehood model, a propaganda strategy characterized by high volume, multi-channel, rapid, repetitive dissemination of false or misleading claims. The claim, of course, was that the 2020 election was rigged and massive fraud had occurred. These claims were repeatedly debunked by courts, state election officials, and federal agencies. Trump pressured Georgia's Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to find additional votes sufficient to overturn Georgia's certified results. He pressured Governor Brian Kemp to convene a special legislative session to overturn the state's certified results. Plans were discussed within the administration to have Republican-controlled states send alternate state slates of electors and potentially force the Supreme Court to intervene. Of course, on January 6, 2021, was nominally an attempt to interfere with the president of the Senate certifying the Electoral College vote. Under the Constitution and the Electoral Count Act, then in effect, the vice president's role was ceremonial, to preside over the joint session of Congress and announce the electoral votes submitted by the states. Despite this limited authority, public pressure was placed on Vice President Mike Pence to reject certified slates of electors from certain states. On the morning of January 6th, a rally was held near the White House where speakers repeated claims that the election had been stolen. Following the rally, a large crowd marched to the U.S. Capitol. As Congress convened to count the electoral votes, individuals breached security barriers, entered the Capitol building, and temporarily halted the certification process. Lawmakers were evacuated or sheltered in secure locations. The interruption delayed the count for several hours. Ultimately, Congress reconvened that evening and completed the certification of the Electoral College results in the early hours of January 7th. Ultimately, those efforts failed because Republican officials, including Raffensperger, Kemp, and Vice President Mike Pence, adhered to their constitutional duties. The system held, but only under intense strain.
The next case study we're going to look at is the year 2000. I remember this very well. The 2000 presidential election came down to Florida and which way it went. George W. Bush led Al Gore by 537 votes. That margin represents 0.009%. Florida's governor was Jeb Bush, the candidate's brother. In 1998, Katherine Harris was also the co-chair of Bush's campaign in Florida. Florida voters passed a voter fraud law requiring all 67 counties to purge voter registrations of duplicate registrations, deceased voters, and felons. The state contracted with a company called ChoicePoint to generate a scrub list. ChoicePoint produced a list of 8,000 names drawn from Texas records. None of the individuals had committed felonies, only misdemeanors. Nonetheless, thousands of Florida voters were removed from rolls due to similar names. These removals disproportionately affected African American voters. Because the margin was less than 0.5%, Florida law required a machine recount. 18 counties did not complete the legally mandated recount. After the machine recount, the Gore campaign requested a manual recount in 4 counties as legally permitted. One of the things this does is it counts provisional ballots, military ballots, mail-in ballots that may not otherwise be counted if there's a clear winner. After the many manual recounts were time-consuming due to controversial ballot designs in certain counties. The recount process ran past certification deadlines. The Florida Supreme Court ruled that the recount should continue and set a new deadline. When the deadline passed with recounts still going on, Secretary Harris attempted to certify the election based on the original 537 vote margin without including recount results. A complex legal battle ensued. The U.S. Supreme Court ruled 5-4 in Bush v. Gore that the recount must stop because it lacked a uniform statewide methodology and there was insufficient time to establish one. Florida's electors were awarded to Bush and Gore conceded. It still remains unclear who actually received more votes in Florida because the election was so close, legal proceedings rather than completed vote tabulations determined the presidency.
Now let's go further back. The election of 1876 occurred during Reconstruction. As many of you know, there was a realignment of political parties on civil rights, segregation, and rights for Black people starting in the 1930s. Prior to that, and even somewhat all the way through the 1970s, the Democratic Party's history is nothing to be proud of. After Black men were granted the right to vote under the 14th and 15th Amendments, the Republican Party gained political power in the South. In response, white supremacist paramilitary groups such as the Red Shirts and the White League emerged. Unlike the Ku Klux Klan, these groups operated openly. They actively and violently suppressed both Black and white Republican voters and were endorsed by Southern Democratic parties. The 1876 elections in South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana were marked by electoral fraud and violence. In South Carolina, 101% of eligible voters had votes tallied. An estimated 150 Black Republicans were murdered. Parties distributed ballots instructing voters which candidates to support. Many Democratic ballots were printed with a symbol of Abraham Lincoln, misleading, particularly in an era when many voters were illiterate. Republican-dominated state electoral commissions rejected enough Democratic votes to award South Carolina, Florida, and Louisiana's electoral votes to Republican nominee Rutherford B. Hayes. Democrats attempted to send their own electors for Democratic nominee Samuel J. Tilden. Oregon presented a separate dispute involving elector certification. 20 electoral votes in total, 8 from Louisiana, 4 from Florida, 7 from South Carolina, and 1 from Oregon were disputed. Congress then passed a law establishing a 15-member electoral commission to resolve the dispute. The commission voted 8-7 along party lines to award the contested votes to the Republican candidate Hayes. Hayes won the presidency by 1 electoral vote. It's generally accepted that Democrats accepted the commission's decision as part of the Compromise of 1877, agreeing to end resistance and threats of political violence in exchange for the withdrawal of federal troops from the South. Historians regard this as the end of Reconstruction. Again, an extremely close election decided by a small body.
One more example is the 1836 election. The Whig Party emerged in 1833 in opposition to Andrew Jackson, but lacked unified national organization. In 1836, the Whigs ran 4 presidential candidates and 2 vice presidential candidates, each with regional appeal. Their strategy was explicit: deny Martin Van Buren a majority of electoral votes and force a contingent election hold on. Um, in the House of Representatives, Van Buren needed 148 electoral votes. He won 170, but only after narrowly winning Pennsylvania by 2%. Had Pennsylvania shifted, the presidency would have been decided by state congressional delegations in a closed session of Congress, despite Van Buren receiving more than 50% of the popular vote. Across 1836, 1876, 2000, and 2020, the pattern is consistent. When elections are close, institutions, courts, commissions, legislatures become decisive, which leads to a practical conclusion. If you want to safeguard elections, one of the most effective strategies is simple: build a decisive margin of victory.
All right, so let's talk about who is fighting back and how. Legal action remains critical. Organizations like the ACLU and Democracy Docket defend the Voting Rights Act, challenge unlawful purges, and assist voters improperly removed from the rolls. Local voting systems rely on poll watchers to deter intimidation. It's increasingly important that poll watchers also help prevent harassment of election workers and officials. Local movements for initiatives such as minimum wage, education, or campaign finance reform help mobilize volunteers and increase voter participation overall. An example in Michigan is Ann Arbor for Public Power, which launched a ballot initiative to establish a publicly owned utility. Voter registration and get out the vote drives remain essential. In Texas, Black Voters Matter TX and Move Texas are actively registering and educating voters ahead of the primaries, as is happening in almost every state. The big difference here is that Democrats are good at organizing. We've been doing this for a long time. Republicans have paid canvassers who are not nearly as good as volunteer canvassers. Their heart's not in it in the same way, and they aren't able to connect with people the same way. So we have an advantage there. The Movement Voter Project funds local organizing and movement building groups working to shift culture, win power, and shape policy. They focus on 4 key goals: win state governing power in March and April, fight GOP gerrymandering, flip the U.S. House by investing early, and organize the progressive youth vote. Democrat-controlled states can fight fire with fire and nullify GOP gerrymandering with their own gerrymandering. California's Prop 50 will allow temporary redistricting adjustments through 2030 in response to aggressive Republican gerrymandering in other states. Legislation proposed or passed in Colorado includes the Colorado Voting Rights Act, which became law in 2025. It protects members of a protected race, color, or language minority group from voter suppression and dilution. It prohibits implementing, imposing, or enforcing a voting qualification or another prerequisite to voting based on an individual's actual or perceived gender identity, gender expression, or sexual orientation. It also prohibits implementing, imposing, or enforcing an additional voting qualification or another prerequisite to voting based on an individual's confinement to a local jail other than those eligibility qualifications that already exist. We also have the Freedom from Intimidation in Elections Act, which became law last year. It prohibits any individual from intimidating, threatening, or coercing or attempting to intimidate, threaten, or coerce any individual for voting or attempting to vote, urging or aiding any individual to vote or attempt to vote, exercising any powers or duties to administer elections, including vote counting, canvassing, and election certification, or the individual's status as a past or present participant in the administration of elections. An individual who carries a visible firearm, imitation firearm, or toy firearm while interacting with or observing any of the specified election-related activities is presumed to have engaged in intimidation, although there are exceptions for law enforcement officers acting within the scope of their authority. It applies to all voting activities and locations such as ballot drop boxes, workplaces of election officials, and voting in the home, not simply polling places.
What can we do locally? Well, the first thing you can do is financially support organizations that are defending voting rights. You can become a poll watcher, and there are two types of this. There are official poll workers, where there's a Democrat and a Republican usually required to be there. And then there are separate poll watchers, which are different, that Republicans have been kind of using to intimidate people. You can serve as an election judge, volunteer as a ballot processor, assist voters in curing signature discrepancies, participate in local redistricting hearings, support ballot initiatives that mobilize turnout, host voter education events, help recruit bilingual education workers, provide transportation to polling places where permitted, support local journalism covering election administration, and engage in issue-based organizing that builds civic infrastructure.
The December special election in Tennessee's 7th district offers a powerful example. Democrat Afton Ben lost by 8.9% in a district that had voted Republican by 21% in 2024 and had been deeply red since the 1980s. That shift demonstrates the impacts of organizing and changing political environments. History shows that attempts to compromise elections succeed only when margins are razor thin. The most effective safeguard for the 2026 midterms is participation at scale. Make the margin decisive, strengthen institutions, protect election workers, support legal oversight. And remember, democracy is not self-executing. It's maintained or eroded by what citizens choose to do next. I want to say a huge thank you to Terry and Ken for researching and writing tonight's presentation about safeguarding the 2026 elections. Now I'll tell you about a few upcoming events here in Colorado.
Hold
And
on
then
a second, Tiffany. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm going
go
to go a
ahead.
little off script and add just a little bit at the end of this. The people who need to be most concerned are the people in red states. Most elections are run by the Secretary of State, and if they are beholden to Donald Trump, they can and will do things that are immoral, unethical, and illegal to change the outcome of votes. Whether that is something like changing the wording on ballot initiatives, whether that's changing what the requirements are to vote, or even just simply how things are processed in the machines, there will be a lot of potential for voter manipulation that we'll never be able to see because of those things. And like I said, it's more likely to happen in red states than blue states.
And we did hear some great speeches from the Secretary of State, Attorney General, and State Senator Gonzalez. So I'm going to put links to those in the
And
chat.
there was a question, are there any restrictions to videoing inside or outside of polling stations?
That I am not 100% sure of. If you want to see if you can find an answer while I'm doing upcoming events,
I will
we
do that.
can.
Well, there was the one about videoing in a polling station, and I found something from Georgetown Law that the short answer is it does depend. There can be local statutes, there can be statewide statutes, there can be Secretary of State rulings, but a lot of times, if there aren't express uh, bans on recording or videoing in a polling station, it's usually left up to the polling place, whether that's okay or not. But really, it's going to depend on your not only your state but potentially your locality as well.
All right, Aaron, go ahead.
When you walk into your polling place, it's going to have a sign on the front door or, close to the entrance that's going to tell you all the rules. And in some places, you can't even take a picture of your ballot or it can be, counted ineligible.
Yep, absolutely.
And someone reminded me about the governor candidate debate that ICANN is holding this Sunday. So let me get the information for that and I'll post it in the chat. That'll take me 1 minute. Oh, Chris, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, yeah, I'm from Texas, and I'm also an election clerk. So I would say here in Texas, you are not able to take a phone. So even if you wanted to look at your ballot or, online or whatnot, we have to instruct people to turn their phones on once they enter the polling location. So, but I think it's probably good advice, what someone mentioned is look at the door. But actually had a question. I joined the call late, so I'm hoping that it'll be recorded and available. But Morgan, I heard you mentioning something in your comments. I'm certainly aware of a lot of tactics that states, especially like my state of Texas, uses to suppress the vote, from taking people off the rolls to real strict voter ID rules, not having same day registration. But you said something that I wondered if you could provide a little more information. You were talking about the potential for there to be some questions about the votes being accurately counted on the machines. So what did you mean by that?
What I meant by that is there are so many instances that we've run into problems where the people that are supposed to be safeguarding our democracy against Donald Trump aren't doing it because they are loyal to him and they fear the repercussions of crossing him. And I think that puts Secretary of States in red states in a petition of potentially finding 11,000 votes to change an election that wouldn't be there otherwise. I do recognize that the safety of the actual machines and tampering with it would be extremely hard to do. But even here, we had an election worker allow people into their polling place to have access to the machines illegally, and that's caused a whole big problem. It wouldn't surprise me if things like that happen in Republican places that we don't even know about, that somebody was able to gain access to those things and make those changes, or even change the spreadsheet to change the numbers at the end because the Secretary of State has access to that. Does that make sense? These are potential hypotheticals. I don't have evidence that says in Texas the Secretary of State is planning on changing this. I'm concerned
Yeah, I
that
just
there
I
are
just wanted
things
to
we're
know if
not
we
going to
had
be able
any.
to see.
Yeah, I just wanted to know if there was something specific. The reason I asked is because there's the Indivisibles has a protect the ballot initiative. And one of the things
Mhm.
that they're really pushing is paper ballots that have certain types of seals on them. And that's interesting because and I don't even know that it necessarily means not using voting machines that then print out a paper ballot. Because that, at least the ones in Texas, that's how it works. You use a touchpad, but then you still have a hard copy ballot. You look at it, you make sure it's all your choices, and then it goes into a tabulator. So I just wondered if there was some data or something that we had seen that was suggesting that we think there's funny business going on with the machines, because I know that we've always really talked about how all the safeguards are in place and the double, triple checks, the chain of control with our, and nothing connected to the internet. So when the Starlink rumor was, that Elon Musk manipulated votes through Starlink, we're like, guys, our machines aren't even connected to the internet. They're standalone machines that are essentially printers, right? So that theory didn't at least play out in the polling locations that I've worked in. So, all
The
right.
closest thing I have to physical evidence that I can point to be concerned is recently Dominion Voting was bought
Purchase, yeah.
was purchased by a right-wing organization. And that then gives the potential for them to code changes into the machines before they even leave the factory to manipulate votes. I have no evidence this is happening. I have no way to prove that this is happening. These are all potentials to be concerned about. But until there's actually evidence of it, I can't say this is happening.
And the other part of that is that there would also have to be a secondary checks and balance that isn't in place, because every state is supposed to take the votes that were counted by the tabulator and cross-reference a sample of those with the hard copy ballots out of the machine and make sure there's a match. So there'd have to be other layers of checks and balances that were compromised, like
Yeah,
not just the machine, but the manual counting and cross-referencing. Okay, all right, well, thank you.
you're welcome. And just to further expand on that, and again, these are all hypothetical potential things. There was a case where um, a gas station was skimming gas and giving people less gas than they were paying
Yeah, like
for.
that kind of stuff I can believe. Yes,
But
100%. Yeah.
when it pumped 5 gallons of gas, it pumped exactly 5 gallons of gas because they knew when the regulators came to check, they
Yeah.
pumped 5 gallons of
Yeah.
gas. I can see a world where in a voting machine, you code it so that when you do the check, it comes out
Yes.
okay. But further deeper in the code that nobody knows about, it's being manipulated. And again, I don't have any proof of this. These are all things that are in the back of my head that I worry about. And I don't know if any of them are going to come true, but I know from having lived in a red state, when it comes to voting manipulation, they're not very shy about doing it. And they're in this case with a sympathetic president, there's a lot that could happen, like I said, that we'll never know about. And that's my fear. All right, Mitch, you're next.
Can you hear me? My name is Demetrius. I've been
Yes,
here many times. Are there any virtual phone banks for Denver for Solidarity Warriors that you know of?
we
We're
don't
not
organize anything. Go ahead, Tiffany.
Uh, so we made a decision to use our resources for other things because there are other groups that do a much better job and have more experience organizing phone banks and canvassing. So what we're going to do is make sure that you guys know about all of the opportunities with other groups and for specific candidates. So we'll definitely put those in the newsletter. Sometimes you have to keep scrolling down to find what you're looking for, but those will be under upcoming events.
Okay, thank you. And are there any events in Arizona that are similar to this, to Solidarity Warriors, you know of?
There are indivisible groups all over the place. We are an indivisible group. And I'll find you the link in 1 second to find a group.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anyone else have a question or comment?
I just have one more comment, Tiffany. So Greg Pallas, we just had him on with our group for a showing of Vigilantes Inc. I think it would be helpful for everybody to watch that film if you haven't already seen it. So that there's some real threat of voter suppression with some of these tactics where, like what they did in Georgia, where literally, and we're doing it in Texas too, where they're taking people off the rolls wrongly. And that's one of the reasons that right now the Trump administration wants the voter rolls. They're trying to cross-reference that against the Homeland Security, or yeah, the HHS, yeah, is it HHS? Yeah. Their database, and what they're doing is removing people that have similar names. So when Greg Pallas did his investigative work, it likely he has the receipts basically to show that it likely influenced the outcome of the last election. So meaning there were enough people that were wrongly taken off the rolls. They currently have litigation right now to, because they didn't get to vote. Because they have what they call vigilantes that they can go up and they can challenge any voter. So these vigilantes would go and list 100 names to the elections committee and say, these people I don't think are legal voters. And until the person sometimes didn't even know that was happening until they showed up at the polls. Here in Texas, we are receiving already reports over and over where people think they're registered. They've always been registered. And then they go on the site and they realize. So we keep telling people double, triple, quadruple check your registration. And really, everybody on this call needs to get that same message out because the purging is especially happening in red states.
You so much for
Yeah.
that info. That's really important.
Can I mention something too that was sort of the scariest thing I found
Yeah.
when I
Yeah.
was doing some research? Okay. So, they've been taking data, and IRS data, all kinds of data that Social Security data, et cetera, they weren't allowed to have. And they've been cross-referencing it against voter rolls is what their big goal is. One of the things they're doing is there's a search system now that they're making them do. I think Missouri and Texas are doing it, where and other states are probably going to go along, where they have these lists of people who are quote unquote non-citizen registered voters, but they're not very good at noticing that those people have become citizens, that they were born to service people overseas, etc. So obviously, most of those people, occasionally, non-citizens registered vote sort of accidentally. They almost never vote because they're terrified to vote, for good reason. I mean, and so my daughter was born in China. There's a serviceman in Arizona, a man who's born to service people, and he went into the army and stuff and lived overseas for a lot of his life. He's running, doing a lot of advocacy for making sure that this doesn't happen. But they've got a search system in place, and they're trying to get states to use this, and they just wipe out huge groups of voters. That's the scariest thing I found.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I'm so sorry if that got left out of the presentation.
Oh no, that's fine. No, there's a lot.
Thank you for bringing it up.
You guys did great. Thanks.
Thanks so much for your work on it, and Ken too. Sharon, go ahead.
Yeah, in light of the conversation as well, but what would be the tactics that we would use in a red state strategies to get a overwhelming participation at scale? In the blue states, we kind of have a plan, but because the red states have all these alternative methods to win, what would be a strategy difference? Would it
So
be door knocking?
Yeah, exactly. So I
Yeah.
believe canvassing is more effective than phone banking, but the trade-off is with phone banking, you talk to a lot more people and it is still effective. So I would say do whatever you can. If you can go out in whatever the weather is in your state and knock some doors. Just look for candidates you support, go to their website, sign up to volunteer, and they will email you when they have phone banks or other things going on. Keep an eye on Mobilize. Check there, every few days for upcoming events in your area. There might even be like remote phone banks. Obviously, usually you can do those from home now.
And in red states, it's going to depend on what the particular flavor of voter suppression manipulation the legislature has come up with, depending on what you can and cannot do to fight it. Um, I would say coming up for the 2026 election, if you are in a district that is 70% Republican, the chances of you getting an overwhelming majority of Democrats to be a decisive victory is very small. But it is likely that in smaller local municipal elections, particularly if they're, March, April, August, and there's lower voter turnout, you can get enough people to go out to have a majority to win those elections. Whereas something like even a state house or senator, or particularly a House of Representative, may be too much to ask. So those are the types of places that I would look if you want to get that kind of overwhelming majority. But when it comes to verifying the voting, whatever your state allows poll workers and watchers to do, I think it's very important to make sure that we have Democrats filling all of those spots at all of the poll locations to make sure that there is no manipulation by Republicans in the absence of a Democratic check.
And I will say, don't count the Democrats out in the bigger races. I mean, when we're looking
Yeah.
at someone losing by a few percent in a district that was 21% margin for Trump, I believe. And there's all sorts of races that are looking close. So I would organize for whoever you feel the most passionate about.
And I would also
And when
say
if you're
Republicans are very unpopular, and it's very likely that there can be some very big surprise upsets and people that aren't expected. I'm not going to, you know, tell you that it's going to be all over the place, but any one particular district, if there is somebody who is unpopular and tied to Trump, you never know what might happen.
And as far as being a poll watcher or working at the polls, look into what the requirements are in your specific area because they can vary by state or even locally, like by city or district. Chris?
Yeah, I was gonna say we just started we have a coalition group that is we're focusing on a couple issues. One, of course, is ICE and what's happening here in Texas with ICE, but the other is, making sure we address the voter integrity and people being able to get to the polls. So some of the things that we're doing, like for example, there was a big mix up or a big mess up, I should say, at in Texas where registration cards didn't go out. So people aren't going to have their registration cards in time for early voting in many locations. And we believe that some people will think that they can't vote because of that. So we're doing voter education specifically to say, you may not have, we've already started it on socials. You may not have your registration card, but you still can vote. The other thing that we're doing is going to have, how you normally would have poll watchers that are associated with the candidate themselves. we're asking for volunteer poll monitors because we already know that we've been threatened that ICE is going to be at our polling locations. And so we want to make sure we have people there that can, be available, can record anything that could potentially, be impacting people's ability to get to the polls. I already mentioned the checking your voter registration 100 times. And the other thing that we have to do, because this is another trick that happens in red states, is they reduce the number of polling locations, especially in areas where they know there's lots of blue voters, like college campuses and things like that. So making sure you have good transportation systems, buses, carpools, we have Uber drivers, things like that that can get people to the poll. So those are just some of the things that we're working on here in Texas.
Thank you. That's awesome and motivating to hear.
And it's great to hear from Texas and what people are doing in other parts of the country.
Jeanette?
Yeah, I was curious what people were hearing or starting to do here or across the country to respond to how much has changed since we've been doing Get Out the Vote. It seems like ever since maybe Hillary, we've been having conversations, those of us going door to door, those of us doing phone banking, things we've done for decades and decades. But at first it was, well, landlines, people are getting rid of them. Well, that's okay. We've finally gotten mobile cell, numbers. People aren't answering if they're not in their contacts. Okay, well, then we got to get out to the doors. Okay, people have Ring now. Many more have Ring, and some won't answer their door even if they don't have a Ring. But now they can identify you, and if they don't know you, they don't answer. So anybody who's out there, or anybody locally too, one of the things we found in the last election, but all elections, is if you can somehow reach neighbors or people at their door and say, "I'm your neighbor," it just makes a very big difference. Well, where do you live? Over at such and such. Oh, okay, you're close. But if you're somebody that they just sent out, people seem to have a different response. But I'd be curious any kinds of things people are coming up with to combat. Really, it's not even coming from the other party. It's just technology and people way more anonymous, people nervous now because of what's going on. So I think they'll be less likely to open their door or answer their phones and things like that. So any suggestions, I'm listening.
I wish there were tools to help on the canvassing front with people not opening their doors, because I have heard that's getting harder to contact people. Luckily with phone banking, there is technology so that people, it just keeps, there's a dialer, and so you only get calls where a person answers. So you're not there dialing individual numbers, waiting for it to ring, getting voicemail. Most of the calls that you're going to get are somebody who's already answered the phone. So luckily there's technology that helps on that front, but I'd love to hear from other people as well.
I was going to say we've come a long way from the days of 10 landlines in a room and everybody calling the same paper list. Um, I agree that it's much harder to reach people because they don't want to be reached a lot of times. Answering doors, answering the phone, it just it doesn't work that way anymore. And I think, there needs to be the use of technology because things are changing. And, so sometimes text messages and emails work better than knocking on doors and making phone calls. That's one reality. But the other one, at least here in Colorado, the Democratic grassroots base goes down to precinct captains. And precinct captains are essentially people in the neighborhood who are meant to go out and do outreach to the people in their neighborhood specifically. And that's where you're more likely to get a connection, because if the guy across the street from you walks across the street and starts talking to you, that's really different than a campaign worker running down a street knocking on doors that nobody knows. And people will be more likely to talk to them in that circumstance where there's at least some familiarity, and it's not a complete stranger. That's kind of the things that immediately come to my mind when you start looking at that kind of stuff.
Start always start by saying you're not Jehovah's Witness.
I'm not trying to sell you anything.
That's
Yeah,
it.
that's the
Right,
best
right. And
opening
I'm
line.
not saying, yeah, but there's a thing called motivational interviewing. They're using the systems like that a lot more, and that's getting out a little earlier and really having discussions with people, and helping them find out what it is that they want to have happen, and moving through those steps. I also
Mhm.
found that when I did canvassing, last minute, especially if people knew me, I used to do it a lot where I taught. um, People would come up to me and say they're having trouble voting or something like that, and I would get right on the phone, and help them get it fixed. There was a Secretary of State during Obama, I remember, who purged a bunch of people. So we haven't had one of those for a while, but those kinds of things, that outreach and stuff can be really good.
Rich, I'm going to get to you in just a second. But the other, what was I can you say about that? Oh, don't get me started on the Democrats' voter file, but it would be nice if there was something in there where people could opt in to have somebody knock on their door, have somebody call them, have mail sent to them. Because if you know that your piece of mail is going to get thrown straight in the trash, it doesn't make sense to do it. If you know that somebody is going to open their door before you send somebody out, that would be a really useful piece of information. All right, go ahead, Rich. Thank you for being
Yeah, no
patient.
worries. No worries, not at all. Just a response and a thought to Jeanette's um, conversation about how we reach people and now canvassing and even phone banking with technology and all. What I'm trying to organize and have been organizing what we're doing in Eastern Pennsylvania out here is particularly in Allentown, Pennsylvania, which is a very predominantly Hispanic voter district that we lost. And so obviously there are deep concern in the Hispanic community about getting out or answering the doors. So we're doing food drives and things like that, where we do food drives. And if they can come to us, it becomes a mass canvassing event where they can walk in and they can have get the necessities, diapers, food, and things like that. And also, we have an opportunity to talk to them. But we also partner with Project Libertad in Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, where they have the contacts with people who are in their homes, where they actually need people to come to them and deliver food, to deliver diapers, and do things like that. And they allow us to go with them and do that and have the conversations with them then. So it's like an opportunity to canvas, but also we're doing the right thing and taking care of people in our community and the people who are the marginalized people that can't leave their homes, that are frightened. And I know it's been a long time, well, pretty long since I've been in the Denver market, but I know there's a enormous Hispanic community, and I think that it would help out there as well.
Now
And that
that's really
reminds,
helpful. And I'm from Philly, so thank you for what you're doing in Allentown and Phoenixville and all, because I went through there during the election and I was stunned that I could go from the Poconos almost to Philly and only see Trump signs. So keep going,
Right,
Rich.
right, right. Yeah, we're getting
what
it
I was going to say is that's where mail-in voting becomes really useful because
for
if
sure.
Hispanic people can vote from home and not need to go to a polling place to cast their ballot, that is a huge safeguard for them. And it's going to make it much more likely that they'll be able to vote if the ballot just arrives in their mail. And in Colorado, there's everybody does mail-in voting. Like everybody gets a ballot, and that's just the way voting is done. They do have
Right.
day of polling or day of voting, but really everybody votes by mail. In places I've lived that didn't have that, a lot of times there are some very specific things that you can do to either get early voting or mail-in voting, depending on what your situation is. And a lot of times there are medical exemptions or other exemptions that you need to take care of somebody in your house and you can't come in and vote. That you can find a reason to get a mail-in ballot or at least vote early when you're not going to have a horde of people and potentially police officers at a voting place if you're going to the Board of Elections on, a Thursday morning, 3 weeks before the election. It's going to be a much safer environment than standing in a line, of 1,000 people waiting to go and vote the day of.
Right. Can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Good.
About the Hispanic community. Like, this is really near and dear to my heart because um, this is, whether it be they were lied to or we alienated them, we lost that vote. Whether they didn't vote or they voted for Trump, we lost that vote. And there's no reason that should have ever happened, but we alienated them. So we have to be very delicate and caring when we reach out to them and we get them. We can't just rely on them mailing in a ballot. Like, we really have to show them that we care and that we love them and that we care about our immigrants. Like, we really have to show them that we love them.
I think that
That's it.
applies to the working class as well.
For
And
sure.
but it's definitely true of Hispanic voters. There's never been a Republican turnout like there was in 2024. There are a lot of signs that there's regret, but that doesn't mean that the Democrats didn't drop the ball. And that does need to
Yeah,
be analyzed and
it's
taken care of.
important to remember that most Latinos still voted Democratic, even though there was a huge shift over. I mean, in some places, obviously, maybe Florida, parts of Florida, that wasn't true, but overall in the whole country, I'm sorry, I don't know where the hand is on this thing to raise, but also poll wise, it appears that we've gained all those guys back, but we won't keep them if we don't do the right things. So.
Absolutely. Chris, did you want to say something else? You had your hand up for a while.
I no, that was my mistake.
Okay.
No, I'm good.
Terry, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there is a react button. And if you click on that,
Okay.
there's something that says raise hand, and that's where you see it.
Okay, I'm not seeing it yet. I'll work on it. I'll find it.
Sometimes it's hidden under more. So look under more and
Okay.
click on that, and then you might see it.
Oops.
Oh, someone asked if the SAVE Act would affect mail-in voting in Colorado. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm not seeing anything about it affecting mail-in voting, but it would affect mail-in registration. Chris, go ahead.
I was just going to say the Save America Act is kind of like my special research project. Yeah, so what is messaged on the Republican side is that it's simply a voter ID, and 80% of people are okay with voter ID. But really, what it does, so if you were a mail-in voter, and this act were to pass, you will be required to come in and physically present your proof of citizenship documents to the election office. So really, for people that are in rural areas that might have to drive an hour to get to an elections office, so there is no remote doing everything. So you have to physically go. The other thing that's unknown or not widely known about it is that because there's a requirement for an elections official to confirm a person's citizenship document, that essentially means all these outreach things that we do, like Powered by the People with Beto, where we do on-site campus registrations, or the radical registrars, all those on-site outreach libraries and things like that. And then just recently, Trump, they just initiated a change where they found kind of like a little bit of a loophole that some of these libraries that are in rural areas are run by nonprofits. So basically, if you are in a library that is run by a nonprofit, you no longer can do outreach, on-site voter registration. So, I mean, they're literally doing everything they possibly can to suppress the vote. And the ultimate goal is to get rid of, I mean, Trump has said this. I mean, he said it outright, is they do not want to have mail-in voting at all. So that's the ultimate goal. But the initial Save America Act will add that additional restriction of requiring mail-in voters to physically go. And there's a couple special exceptions, like for military and some, really seriously disabled people and things like that. There's a couple of, exceptions, but they're rare exceptions.
I'll take it a step further and say they don't want free and fair elections. They want elections that are
Exactly.
rigged for Donald Trump to win. And that is their goal in a lot of this legislation.
Yeah.
And when it comes to, those sorts of things, a lot of times it depends on what state you're in, what the remedies you have to that type of regulation is. But making it harder to vote is one of the ways they do it. And they know that there are more Democrats than there are Republicans. And they count on Democrats staying home and not voting in larger numbers than Republicans to win. If you all of a sudden start mail in voting across the country, all of a sudden these Democrats who aren't coming out to vote get out the vote is a lot easier if the ballot shows up in your mailbox and you say, please mail it in. And that's one of the reasons that they don't want mail in voting. It's not that it's any less secure than voting in person, it's because it's a strategic loss for them to allow it. And the more common it becomes, the more likely they are to lose. Go ahead, Mitch.
And actually, real quick, if the SAVE Act were to pass, it would apply nationwide. So it would supersede any conflicting rules or legislations in Colorado and any other state.
Uh,
Mitch, go ahead.
Am I right in saying, this is Demetrius, am I right in saying that they have put all of this like discriminatory language in there, like for women with multiple names, people with disabilities, names that they can't even pronounce from other countries that they say are not American, but they were from here. Is that what they're trying to do? Trying
So
to,
the idea is that they are purging the voter rolls of people who are dead, who no longer live in this state, who are not allowed to vote, is the justification for doing these things. The reality is, a lot of times, it's the discretion of the Secretary of State who gets pulled off the rolls or not, and that process is not very transparent.
oh, okay. All right, thank you.
All right, folks, we gotta call it there. I have another meeting to go to in half an hour. But thank you again to Terry and Ken for helping with the presentation tonight. And I hope you all have a wonderful evening.